The fire took every wall I owned in one night, and my mother took 90 seconds to decide it wasn't her problem. I'm Ivy, 33, a hospice nurse who has held more dying hands than I can count, who has learned to stay calm while everyone around me falls apart. At 3 in the morning, I stood in a parking lot in a stranger's borrowed coat, watching the second floor of my life turn black. Smoke was still in my hair when I called my parents, and my mother, half asleep and already irritated at being woken, told me it wasn't her problem and that I should have been more careful. Then a man in a gray jacket walked up, a fire investigator, and asked me a single question that would split my family in half. Who had a key to my apartment last week? Days later, in a quiet county office, what he lifted out of a sealed evidence bag made my blood run cold. And what I did with it, 48 hours after that, none of them ever saw coming. My family had a rule: nobody ever said out loud, I was the strong one, so I was the one nobody had to catch. For 11 months I had moved into my grandmother's house, managed her medications, bathed her, sat up through the worst nights, while my mother visited on holidays, and left before the dishes were done, and my sister Delia came by twice. I never resented it. Caring for the dying is my calling, not a favor I keep score of. But Nana kept score. 6 weeks before she passed, she asked me to drive her to see a lawyer, and in the waiting room she held my hand and said only, "You stayed. I see who stays." A month after the funeral, the will was read aloud. The house on Sycamore, the one Nana had lived in for 50 years, worth roughly $300,000, was left entirely to me, not divided, not shared. My sister knocked her chair over standing up, insisting Nana hadn't been in her right mind. My mother said we'd discuss it privately, which in our family always meant pressure the strong one until she folds. What none of them knew was that weeks earlier, I had already had the will notarized, copied, scanned, and hidden somewhere no fire could ever touch. That quiet decision was about to matter more than any of us understood. The morning after the fire, sitting on a motel bedspread filling out insurance forms, my sister called crying, then pivoted mid-sentence to ask whether Nana's fireproof box had survived. She shouldn't have known that box existed at all. My mother, the night before, hadn't asked if I was safe or where I would sleep. She had asked only whether any of Nana's papers had been inside. 2 women, 2 phone calls, and the same question, and neither one had asked about me. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house, hoping for a spare room. My mother opened the door only halfway. "We just don't have the space right now," she said. My father appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, and offered the sentence he always uses to avoid anything hard. "You know how to handle yourself, kiddo." Twice in a single day, I was told I wasn't their problem, that I would land on my feet, that I always did. Standing on the porch I grew up on, something clicked into place with total clarity. They weren't cold because they were cruel, that I once made them pay for it. "So this time," I said quietly, "you're right. I'll handle it." And I meant it in a way my mother never heard. But what I would learn next, about who actually held a key to my apartment that week, was about to turn my grief into something much colder. The investigator, Frank, laid the diagram on a wide table and explained it plainly. An accidental fire spreads outward from an obvious source: wiring, a stove, a space heater. Mine hadn't. It had a single point of origin, low, in the corner beside my filing cabinet, nowhere near any outlet, deep and localized in exactly the way you get when a liquid is poured, rather than sparked. Someone, he said, had done this on purpose. Aimed straight at the corner, where I kept every important paper I owned. When he asked who had a key, my stomach dropped to ice, because the honest answer was not only me. A week before the fire, my sister had asked, sweetly, to borrow my spare key to water plants I don't even own. It had struck me as odd at the time, and I'd let it go anyway. The building's single hallway camera kept only 14 days of footage before it recorded over itself, and the fire had happened 6 days earlier. We raced against that clock and preserved it just in time. What it showed was a figure in a long tan coat letting herself into my apartment the night before. The fire, my sister, caught for one clear frame looking up at the lens. Then the lab confirmed a gasoline range accelerant from that exact corner. And investigators recovered something small and warped from the ashes. A brass lighthouse keychain. Half of a matching pair I had given her years earlier, as a gift from a trip we once took together. It felt like the floor had opened beneath me. My own gift to her had melted into the corner of the fire she had lit. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. I did exactly what I do at a bedside when the numbers start going wrong. I moved calmly to the next right action. I built a folder, time-stamped photographs, screenshots, a running timeline written in the same flat language I used to chart a patient's decline. My sister, trying to sound like a concerned relative, texted asking whether the fire had really started over by the filing cabinet in the corner. A detail that had never been released outside the investigation. My mother, trying to sound sympathetic on another call, accidentally described the exact layout of the inside of my apartment, a place my sister had sworn under oath she had never once entered. I wrote every line down, calm, clinical, complete, and forwarded what mattered straight to Frank. At a relative's funeral, a neighbor mentioned, laughing over coffee, that my sister's husband had borrowed a gas can 2 weeks earlier and returned it bone dry, for a lawn the size of a stamp. I had no recording, and I didn't need one. I had a witness who told the truth without knowing what he'd witnessed. Every thread was tightening into a single, undeniable shape, and the probate hearing for Nana's house was only days away. Both cases, the will and the fire, were about to breathe the same air in the very same room. My sister had spent the week whispering to relatives that I'd manipulated a dying woman out of her house, certain she had already won the only fight that mattered, because she believed the will had burned along with my apartment. In the courtroom, her lawyer announced smoothly that the only known copy of the will had been lost in the fire, and that the estate should therefore be split evenly under the older will. My sister exhaled in visible relief and turned to give me a look that said quite plainly, "You should have just let it go." I stood instead, and my grandmother's ex-lawyer rose beside me and said the words that changed the temperature of the whole room. "Your Honor, the original will is available. We have it here." I set it on the table, notarized, sealed, the raised stamp untouched, because it had never once been inside my apartment. Beside it came the lawyer's own independently retained copy and a signed statement from Nana's physician, confirming her sound mind, an airtight, unbreakable stack. I watched my sister's confidence drain away in slow motion. Then Frank rose and laid out calmly the shape of the arson case for the court. The single point of origin, the confirmed accelerant, the hallway footage of a figure entering the night before, and a personal item recovered from the ashes bearing her name. My sister shot up so hard her chair toppled, and she screamed the one sentence no lawyer could ever take back. "It was supposed to be the house, not you." The room fell utterly silent. My mother lunged to quiet her and, in her own panic, said, "We'll fix this. Just like we always do." And for the first time, half the family finally heard the truth hiding inside that word, we. The judge awarded me the house on Sycamore that same afternoon. My sister was formally arrested a week later, on charges of aggravated arson and insurance fraud, and her husband was charged as an accessory once his alibi fell apart, under an hour of delayed questioning. There was no celebration in any of it, only a deep, quiet ache. The same one I feel at the end of a long shift when a patient finally finds peace. In the months that followed, I turned Nana's house into a small hospice home, exactly the kind of place she would have wanted, and I hung her photograph in the front hall so she could watch over every hand I hold there. My parents came by once, near the holidays, and my mother asked quietly if we could put it all behind us and be a family again. I told her the door wasn't locked forever. But that trust isn't something you're owed by blood. It's something you rebuild, brick by brick, if it's rebuilt at all. Fire proves what's real. Paper burns, but the truth you finally have the spine to write down and say out loud never does. And somewhere, my sister is still learning exactly what that lesson costs her. But this story might not be over yet.